Okay, make a start, I think. Welcome, everyone. So, time is now 4 o'clock. Could I ask Democratic to start recording, please? Could I please ask all officers and guests who are joining remotely to turn off their cameras so that only councillors, lay members and co-opted members are on the screen? You are asked to turn on your camera when you're presenting reports or responding to questions, but please turn them back off after your item is finished. Pnawn da, croeso i cyfarfod, diolch am bawb am dod. Hello and welcome to Merthyr Tydfil County Borough Council's Regeneration, Housing and Public Protection on Tuesday, the 8th of April 2025. Please note that this meeting may be recorded and broadcast via the authority's internet site. The images and sound recording may also be used for training purposes. Item agenda 1, apologies for absence. I've had one apology from Howard Jackson, and Melissa is joining online. Melissa's been unwell, so please bear with her. No other apologies? No, none others received. Item agenda 2, declarations of interest. Are there any? No. Okay, moving on. Item agenda 3, update on empty property strategy 2022 to 2026. Councillor Anna Williams-Price will present.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for inviting me to join you. Following the announcement of Cabinet changes last week, this has likely been my first and last report on this area, but thank you, and I'm happy to be here for a discussion on the empty property strategy for 22-26. So this report provides a comprehensive review of our progress since the strategy's approval in February 2022, and it details both the achievements to date and ongoing actions needed in addressing long-term empty homes. The report outlines progress in returning long-term vacant properties back into beneficial use, with a particular focus on how we're meeting our annual target by achieving 7% of houses brought back into use. At Appendix 1, there is an updated action plan that will guide us through the remaining stages of the strategy, including the implementation of council tax premiums on properties that have remained empty for extended periods. Members will see that the 7% target has been achieved across all 3 years of the strategy. And as Cabinet member and as someone who was previously sat on this committee, my focus in bringing this report has been to provide assurance to Scrutiny that the actions set out in the empty property strategy are being completed, and we can demonstrate a clear impact on the number of empty properties across the borough being brought back into use. Key highlights from the updated action plan include the establishment of the dedicated steering group in February 2025. This fosters cross-departmental collaboration and continuous review of our progress against the action plan. The development of enhanced communications plan, which alongside a revamped website featuring an integrated online reporting tool, will aim to increase public awareness and engagement on empty home issues. Initiatives building new partnerships with external investors, registered housing providers and existing landlords, promoting opportunities available to convert vacant properties into occupied homes, and a systematic programme of risk assessments focusing on the properties that have been vacant the longest. The assessments completed by the Environmental Health Team, specifically for properties empty over 10 years, will provide useful insights into our work moving forward, and also shows early indication of a potential positive impact of council tax premium policies now in place. Thank you to Melissa and Sean, and of course Paul in the Environmental Health Team and Public Protection teams. They're all here available to answer questions on the report, and also thank you to Mark Price from the Council Tax team for making himself available today. I am content that this is an area of work now on a positive trajectory, and we can have confidence we have the systems and processes needed to meet the aims of the strategy and bring that total of 200 houses back into use by 26-27. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Anna. I'd like to open them to questions. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask one general question? Because it appears that the policy states that once we reach 200, I think it's 200 properties that have come back into use, that's it. But when you look at the figures, and The last figures available, 22-23, total number of long-term empty properties, 582. We are still on the, hopefully, the upward movement and not to stop part of the way up the ladder. So can somebody tell me, does that policy need to be revisited when we reach the magic figure of 200?
Thanks, Councillor Jones. I'm happy to revisit any particular wording, but my understanding has always been that's the minimum figure we're aiming for. It's certainly not a limit to what we would look to achieve.
I was always advised many years ago by a former town clerk that words are very important. So perhaps that needs to be looked at because officers follow policy and they'll follow a figure that's in there. On page 7, and if you look at table 2, we got the figures for the last available 3 years. And I know that it's a 24-25, the provisional data, and may not have the whole figure. But I presume that we keep these figures totaling up as we go along. Have we got an idea of the estimate of how many long-term properties have broken into use in 24-25?
Sorry, are you referring to the report here tonight or to the strategy?
No, there's a table in the middle of higher up on page 7. It's got 24, 25, 20. Oh, sorry. Is that the? Why does it say 24, 25 provisional data will be validated?
Yeah, I'm with you now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the data is gathered and assessed annually in accordance with the performance indicator, and I think it's in Appendix 3, the definition of that. So obviously we're on 8th of April now, and you've already heard that Melissa's actually off on sick. So we haven't been able to finalise that because we need to go back.
Right. So is that figure of 42 an estimated figure at the moment?
Yes.
So it might go up.
It might go up. It's unlikely to come down. It might go up.
Okay. Right. Thank you for that. I got a few other questions, Chair, as we go through. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Then when we come to the Appendix 1, yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't see. It's not showing on my screen. Melissa, I think Melissa wants to come in as well. So.
Hi, Chair. Thanks for that. Yeah, just wanted to clarify on that note, Councillor Jones, that those 42 are all validated. They've definitely come back into use this year, but those figures were collected around about the 24th of March. So what will happen is that that'll be repeated now mid-April, and the ones that are found determined at mid-April, they will be the final figures. So they won't decrease at all. But there's a slight chance they may increase slightly.
Sorry, Councillor Jones.
Right, thank you for that. If you look at number 6 on Appendix 1, it says there, identify new external investment partners who can purchase empty homes from an owner. And that's going to be discussed at the next steering group meeting. And then whatever the actions are reported to members. Am I right in saying that if that happens, that some of these properties could end up as applications for HMOs? Because we seem to be breeding those right throughout the county borough.
Sorry?
Yeah. Obviously, we won't have any control over what investors might or might not want to do, and there's regulatory regimes in place, such as your planning sort of processes to go through if that was the case. So I can't say that they would or wouldn't be HMOs. That's kind of out of our control, but our aim here is to bring as many of these properties back into use.
It's a distinct possibility in my mind, but I'm always suspicious. You know? Right, if you go on to 7 there, and it's working with existing and new landlords who are able to purchase empty properties and bring them back into use. And it says, follow the long ad hoc matching of new landlords investors with empty property owners. Can I ask why this hasn't been happened in the past?
This has been happening in the past, whereby officers have been coming across landlords in their day-to-day work on responding to complaints, and if they are interested in purchasing new properties, then we can get property owners their permission whether to put them in contact, and that's kind of the matching service.
So we've had success with that in the past.
I wouldn't have data on how many have gone through that process. It hasn't happened recently, but it has historically happened, and we want to reinvigorate that through the steering group, because there may be opportunities beyond environmental health across the council to do this as well. But yes, we want to reinvigorate it. It's
the word in there, I presume from reading it, that this was going to happen and it hadn't happened before, but that's not the case. It has been happening in the past. Okay, and we'll be talking about the steering group. Who's on the steering group? Is it officers from various departments, and is the cabinet member a member of that steering group?
I can come in there, Chair. Yeah, it's a cross section of those who were involved, Councillor Jones. So public protection, environmental health, council tax, housing, regeneration, myself, planning. So right. Everyone who sort of touches different elements of the action plan, we've brought together and re-established that steering group. No cabinet member or member involvement at this stage.
Right. Okay. Thanks. I'm still on Appendix 1. Number 10, it refers to houses to homes, loans, review of the financial assistance measures and mark it as appropriate. And if you follow it along, it says provide members with an update on loans and grants on a quarterly basis and report on a quarterly basis to members. To whom?
I think the idea is to report to the cabinet member on this.
Right. It says members, so I presume that's the whole cabinet then. But it says quarterly basis, 2 members. I presume that was elected members.
If I can come in there, Chair. In terms of public protection, we'll have a quarterly performance review which involves director and portfolio member. This will form one of the priority areas in terms of reporting on a quarterly basis. So yeah, it would be the portfolio member, and obviously to bring to any relevant scrutiny and to cabinet at the reporting stage on the strategy.
Right. So at some time it may well report into members. I don't know.
Yeah, if it's called by scrutiny, such as today, we can obviously update scrutiny at the relevant time. If we are giving updates to cabinet on the strategy, we would include there. But as part of performance monitoring on an operational level, it'll be cited by the director and it'll be cited by the relevant portfolio member.
Okay, thanks. Where was the next one? Oh yes, 14. Says set up empty homes steering group to utilise the knowledge. Is this the same steering group we were talking about? But I thought it was already set up and working. Am I wrong?
Yeah, it was set up earlier this year, and there's regular meetings being set up for the next 3 months as well. But we've already met twice, yes.
Right. So there was no steering group before then, before whenever it was.
I'm not aware that there was, no.
Right. Okay. And then we go to Appendix 2, Chair. Paragraph 1 on there. Further to a request on scrutiny, environmental health undertook visual inspection of 51 properties that have been vacant for more than 10 years. During the inspection, the property was photographed and the risk assessment was completed. I'm not being facetious in asking this question, but when it was surveyed, was the whole of the inside surveyed?
No.
So how can we estimate what the state of the property was when perhaps we've only taken a photograph of the outside and we don't know what the state of the inside is?
Well, we'd have to use powers of entry to get in there, and this is just to try and identify the ones that are most problematic and impacting on the community. That would give an indication, the external condition. Of course, I understand what you say, that we need to go inside, but that might be the next stage once we've identified the highest risk ones. I think later on it says there was 6. It would be a considerable amount of work to access each one of these and to do a full survey of it, when owners really can keep these properties empty if they're not causing a problem to any other individuals in the community. That's within their gift to do that. Of course, there are, you could call, penalties insofar as council tax, but it's their prerogative as to whether they want to keep it empty or not. But I do get your point in that internal inspection would give us more information around the number of units it could provide, etc., etc. But we want to address the worst. Hopefully the ones that are of less risk might decide themselves to bring them back into use.
Not only the number of units, but the actual state of the property. When you say powers of entry, do you have to make application to the Magistrates Court to obtain power of entry, or is it in the legislation that you can enact?
There's a range of legislation available to us, and in the main, you would need to get to obtain a warrant to enter with a reasonable reason to go in there. If the condition is pretty bad, then that might be one we want to prioritise, and then we would utilise that power of entry, particularly if it's affecting neighbouring properties, as we would in dealing with any complaints.
Well, I'll give you an example of that. So if there was a rodent problem, for example, would that trigger off a power of entry?
Unfortunately, under the Prevention of Damage by Pests Act, it is one of the anomalies that we don't have powers of entry under that. It is a bit of an anomaly.
That needs to be looked at then by somebody at a national level. And I'll give you an example. This is a few years ago, property in one of the streets in our ward where we were approached by neighbours. And we found out that this property had been empty for 8 years. There was no evidence of the owner coming to even go through the front door and have a look at the state of it. We were able to view the state of the back garden area from the residents living next door down, and that was dreadful. And that indicated to both myself and my councillor colleague that more than likely the inside of the property wasn't much better. And there was a rodent problem, no question about it. They were going through the attics from house to house. There's about 3 houses affected by it, and there was your officers going back and forth. Anyway, we found out eventually that the owner wasn't living 100 miles away, living in Trearis. And it was only when a property would happen to be the other side of this property, where they took the roof off, and they could see all the evidence, and the builder said, hang on, you're a rat problem here. Contacted the owner, and she was up there pretty sharpish. So, there's anomalies there which clearly need to be looked at, in my opinion.
Can I ask a question on the back of that? In terms of the 51 properties, were any of them internal, or were they all external visits?
They were all external at this stage, yeah.
Would any of them be written to ask if you could gain entry?
We've only just completed that survey now.
Okay.
We write to all owners anyway. it has been on a 2-yearly basis. We're looking to do that annually.
Okay.
And the most problematic ones tend not to engage, which is why they become higher risk. So, yeah, but we haven't in this case. That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And
Chair, if I could just come in there.
yeah, sorry.
But obviously, in addition, this particular piece of work was done around the empty home strategy. We have day business, so if we have complaints about premises that's causing rat infestation, the officers would investigate that as part of their normal duties. I think what this report shows is in terms of the visual inspection, that was on the basis of causing community concerns over dilapidated state. It's just to assure members that we wouldn't just rely on this visit. If there are additional problems that have been reported, the officers would use their normal investigative methods. So this visual inspection was in addition to what an officer would normally do on receipt of complaints.
Yeah, in this particular case, as I said, it was about 2 years ago, and because of the fact that this roof, the next one up, been completely and exposed the problem, the owner came up there pretty sharpish. But the house had been empty for over 8 years, and there was because there was a 3-year-old child in the one property, and the rats coming across the ceiling there. They sent us a video of it, and you could hear them scratching there night after night.
I just wanted to assure you, Councillor Jones, that this report and obviously the assessment that's taking place will also look at historical records about a property. And although we might not have powers to go into a property, I'm sure if we had a complaint about rats infestation into an adjoining property, the officers could obtain that evidence by visiting the adjoining property.
Yeah.
So I didn't want the confusion that we wouldn't investigate. Of course, we would investigate, but this visual inspection is in addition to what an officer would normally investigate.
Okay, that's fine. I'm on paragraph 2 now.
Clive, sorry. If you had just ask one more and I can bring other members in. No, you can ask that one. Go on. You've started. Go on, it's fine.
It says there, the second sentence, this is about the risk assessment form utilised for this group inspection was amended from the risk assessment form, including the strategy. The length of time vacant was removed from the form, as this project was specifically looking at properties that had been vacant for more than 10 years. So, question I got, why was the length of time removed? I presume you talked about it only applied to 10 years or more, but we got a few hundred properties that have been vacant under the 10 years. So is there a different form for those under 10 years?
So if I can refer you to the actual strategy itself, in there's a risk assessment right at the back. It's page 35. You don't have to refer to it at the moment, but there's a number of areas that we look at, and one of those, I'm just trying to find it now, was how long. It's actually the first one, the first criteria: length of time vacant, 6 to 1 year, 1 to 5 year would gain the 5 points, and over 5 would gain 10 points. But we were already in this instant looking at the over 10s anyway. So that element was taken out in its entirety because they would have all gained 10 points anyway. So that was the reason for that wording.
Oh, right. Okay.
So that doesn't mean that we will take it out permanently.
Right. And one last question. Right. It's on page 16, and this block refers to the number of owners. I think it refers to is it 23 owners? It says right that under, so it's the number of owners. They split them up to what's happening about each group of those, and the last one says those that require additional funding to complete renovation expressed interest in interest-free loan, but that's currently 12 months waiting list for the loan. So you've got properties which have been empty for years, but when you tell them about the interest-free loan, they have to go to a queue like anybody else. Wouldn't they receive some sort of priority by the fact that there is a problem with them and they've been empty for some years. And we are concerned as an authority, but it says they got to wait 12 months for a loan.
So that is a Welsh Government a loan scheme. I just had an update this morning to say that we've closed the loan scheme now because it's coming to an end and we have got a long list of people already on it. So that's where we're at the moment with that.
So are there, because we've got whatever it is, over 400 odd empty properties, are there a number of those in that group that have been directed for interest-free loan and they can't do anything because they've got to wait? Well, it's been shut down. You know, when is that going to be replaced and renewed?
I don't think there is a plan to renew it, was my understanding.
It's finished?
Yeah. It hasn't it's coming to an end.
Right, but they're not going to, when it comes to an end, which sounds like shortly, they're not going to renew it.
That was not my understanding. I don't think it's going to be renewed. But, you know, we'll watch that space.
Yeah. Okay, Chair, thank you very much. I think that's my questions for now.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Jones. Councillor Smith?
Thank you, Chair. And I'm not so worried about the short-term empty properties because I can see the work the officers are doing and they're changing because you've brought 100 odd properties in. My concern is the long-term because if you walk around certain areas and you're up in one come empty for 5 years and it brought the area down terrible. So what plans have we got to take that forward? I know you've got a steering group and I know you meet now and again, but I'm not happy with some of the comments people are dragging their feet. Because as far as I'm concerned, these long-term properties should be done properly. And if you can't do it tidy, sell things off because it's costing money, it's costing us time, staff time, everything else, and it's just mounting up. So, you know, let's have a look, review what we can do, and that's my concern. Because wherever you go, north to south, east to west in the county borough, you've got these properties there empty over 10 years, and they're ratios.
Okay. When the officers undertook the inspection of or external survey of these properties, they were quite surprised at the number of empty properties that you would not consider to be empty if you were just walking down the street. They were not problematic from what we could see. So that's the first point I want to make. The second point, I think we highlighted that there were about 6, I think, that were of the top sort of risk. We do intend to take a report back to Cabinet to get a steer on how we approach these, but obviously they do need to be tackled. And there's, you know, several avenues. Obviously, at the same time, we'll probably be receiving complaints about these as well. So there will be short-term solutions to some of the issues. And there's, you know, a range of options that we can take. But it does take time. You know, it can take a couple of years to get to go through the enforcement process on some of these if owners aren't engaging with us, which many of them, for the most problematic, they aren't.
Well, I'll accept that for it. So, Mark, if the officers can't find it's a long-term property empty, can they pick it up on council tax? Because that's another issue, because it's costing us money. Right? At the end of the day, if they're not paying the council tax, when we picked it up straight away or is it long term?
It was council decision to introduce a council tax premium on the 1st of April 2023 for long-term empty properties, for property that was empty for more than 12 months. Right? In the report that went to council in October last year, it was decided that it was 150% for properties 5 to 10 and 200% for properties 10 plus. I think we got 48 properties that are 10 years plus, looking at the category you're looking at the moment. To pick up on Sean's points there are a number of properties, quite significant number of properties, that whilst they remain empty significantly for long periods of time, that they aren't causing any problems to environmental health, or neither would they cause any problems for me within revenue, because the people who own the properties are paying. However, I use two properties that or two customers or council taxpayers, call them what you will, that we've recently been engaging with, both in the town ward. One has been in the estate for the best part of 30 years, still empty. And it's only now that they actually come in to engage with us as a result of us sending a letter and saying that you've now got to pay 200%. The first indication was that the gentleman who was in his 80s had left his wife and he was actually going to live in the property, which was clearly a fallacy. So when you've got issues that these people have been paying by direct debit year after year after year, nothing wrong with the property that was causing any significant impact to the community on a council tax point of view. Yes, okay, the fact that we've introduced these higher rate of premiums, it is certainly resulting in greater engagement with the council taxpayer and the general public. Hopefully that the whole purpose of this new strategy and policy that we're trying to put into place, and obviously with the various mechanism and engagements as far as ownership and all the rest of it, will actually feed in to the council tax side of it, because we will guide the relevant people into the relevant areas, as far as whether it is HRAs or whichever, to try to bring the properties back into use. But if it's not a financial burden, as far as I'm not chasing that person for arrears, then it doesn't make any difference to me in council tax whether it remains empty or not, because my responsibility is to bill and collect. So it then falls into the world of other areas, housing and environmental health. So we all come together, but we've all got separate parts to play within the whole.
I think Councillor Williams-Price wants to come in, and then Paul.
Thank you. Yeah, I think from my perspective, Bill, as Mark's alluded to, although the council tax team, the environmental health team work together, I think the empty home strategy is firmly owned within the environmental health team, and they are leading on it. But I take your point about whether there is an intersection between long-term empty properties and council tax non-payers. I can take that back from a different perspective outside of the strategy to see if there is any intersection. I think in terms of long-term empty properties, we share that concern, and obviously we've undertaken this risk assessment of every property over 10 years vacant. As you see from the report, there are some positives within this, in that of the 19 owners that were spoken to, they were all made aware of the council tax premiums, and the majority of them did indicate that would impact on their behaviour, and they would look to do something with these properties as a result of those premiums. So as I said, there's initial indication that those policies will hopefully work and hopefully come to fruition and benefit us. And then more generally, obviously, again in this report, we're committed now to undertaking a risk assessment of everything between 2 and 10 years by the end of the strategy. So we'll be in a really good place to review what action we can take in future and what needs to replace the strategy when it comes to an end in 26-27.
Councillor Williams-Price stole my thunder in the report. As the report says, encouragingly, the people who we did speak to, the council tax increase does look to stimulate some movement in that market. So that is a positive.
The only thing I'm going to say in this, as Mark just mentioned, there's a guy 81 who moved back to his old property, which has been empty for years. So how many people we've got in that age group will pass away, and where do the property leave to? Because if they haven't got a will and they haven't been left to anybody, it's there for every day. So I think we want to review that and have a look at it, because I don't. It's enough from Brecon Road empty now for 30 odd years. Well, the street that the address says, right? So if they don't leave a will, does somebody pick it up? What's come to it? So I think that want to be reviewed.
Can I ask a question on the back of Bill's as well? In terms of the long term, when I say long term, like the 10 years plus, are there any that are not engaging in terms of paying council tax? Or are they all, have we got any serial non-payers?
Well, the pattern as far as non-payment is concerned, the overall collection year for this year is 94.6%. The collection rate in respect of long-term empty properties is 79%. So when we're actually looking at the measure on there, the fact that these individuals are paying twice the council tax as it currently stands, it is impactful upon the local authority because we're not collecting the same level of arrears. When I looked at an exercise and I brought the report to council, go back in October, of the 20 oldest properties that we had, I think there was only 2 that were problematic. The other 18 were paying by direct debit, and one of those was one of those properties which I mentioned a short while ago. So in answer to your question, as it stands at the moment, not necessarily, is more individual based than across the board for the reason that if they're empty, they're not paying. That's certainly not the case.
In terms of the non-payers, how long would you let it go into arrears before you take action through a court?
Well, it's the same as any other liability. I'd use this particular pattern now within this current financial year. We've just issued the council tax demand notices in March. If it's all labelled with instalments from April through to January or March of 2026, by the 21st of this month, if the instalment's not paid, they'll receive a reminder. In May, they'll have a final, and probably sometime in June, they could end up with a liability order or summons to attend court in whatever the next court available, so that they are not treated any different to any other council taxpayer. Where we go thereafter, well, it depends on the circumstances. It could go to distress, or it could go, well, we haven't gone further, as far as charging orders of bankruptcy for a little while. But they are the options after it's actually gone to court. It could go to enforcement agents, so that we would use the full range of recovery options available to us in pursuance of that liability if there was one.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Okay, Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. In Appendix 1, in paragraph 11, it says investigating the feasibility of adopting an empty dwelling management order process. Can you explain to us what that process is, please?
You have to ask the hard questions, don't you?
Oh, sorry, Sean.
I couldn't give you
It's the only one I didn't know, though, so I thought I had to ask.
I couldn't give you a breakdown of the exact measures, but essentially it means taking over that property, and the local authority manages that for a period of time and then hands it back after a period of time. Period of time being 5, 10 years, I don't know.
It's a new one on me, sorry.
Yeah.
But having explored with other local authorities through our networks, this isn't something that local authorities are using at the moment, because there are easier ways of addressing the problematic cases, particularly if they become, if we've undertaken works in default under certain pieces of legislation, we can then sort of start the enforced sale procedure, which is much easier, because it means then we're forcing them to sell onto somebody else, and it doesn't become a risk or a liability for the local authority.
I'm going to ask another question on that, right? But it's going to lead into the third question I've got. Is there any funding available by Welsh Government in that South East Wales group for the management of those properties?
I don't know is the answer at the moment. Not specifically for that management order, but there are funding streams available within Welsh Government, yes.
Okay. Right, that leads nicely on now to number 10, really, that's in that on Appendix 1, and the review of the financial assistance. As a lot of you will be aware, I was the cabinet member for this area for 2017 and 2022. And I worked very closely with Paul and Sian and with the housing team, because they were all in the same portfolio back then, and it's all been a bit fragmented since. But we all were, right, and we wrote the Welsh Government very critical about the grants and the loans and how beneficial they would be. Is it possible we could have a Merthyr Council review and a paper on it to say, warts and all, people that were happy with the grant process and the loan process and people who weren't, how many people had funding, etc. Because when myself and Alan Owen, the director at the time, and the head of service, when we looked at the loans, to help homeless people back into housing, we knew it was a joke from the beginning. And Sean, I'm not surprised it's been cancelled, right, after you said today. But it would be good if we could have a report on that, just to understand how successful it is, please. Is that possible?
Yeah, I'm sure the recommendations will be picked up by Cabinet Member.
Yeah, Anna, do you want to come in?
Thank you. I've already made a note based on earlier contributions, Councillor Thomas, that I think it might be worth using this report as an opportunity to just take stock of where we are. And as you can see from the action plan, obviously part of the action plan is to feed into national policy and debate. So I think what we can do is look at where we are now and whether we need to write to Welsh Government to see what support they can offer to help us achieve the empty property strategy for the rest of the duration.
Thank you, Anna. And I've got a question for you as well. My last question is, I sat on the Welsh Local Government Association Executive Cabinet for the housing side of things, where we discussed a lot of these things and the funding formulas, etc., and the grants that will be coming down the line. Who represents Merthyr Tydfil County Borough Council now on that housing group? And who will be sitting on there after May? Because we're not really sure how the portfolios are going to sit.
Thanks. So housing still remains within Councillor Scriven's portfolio. So so in terms of the WLJ committee, I don't sit on that. So my assumption is Councillor Scriven still and will remain so, but I can confirm that for you and follow up.
Thank you. Thank you,
Councillor Thomas. David?
For their efforts. I just want to clarify something on bottom of page 7. If I look at the figures 23 to 24, the number of long-term houses was 529, and we brought 39 into use. You take 39 from 529, you'll end up with 490, but in the next year we've got 540, so we've grown 50. So we're getting more coming in as we've been going out.
It's a moving beast. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, our sons.
So we basically, even with the 7%, we're less than stagnant sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, there are more that come online, but hopefully with a lever of, council tax premiums, that we'll see a different trend is the hope. But yeah, it's one to watch.
But obviously we can see these coming to the 10-year period, and obviously the council tax is 150% and it's going to go to 200%, and we're seeing that's working successfully as a lever to get in engagement, which is very good. I'd just like to clarify another figure. You said that was just recently we got 48 properties, 10-year plus was stated, and the collection rate is 71%. Is that on those, or as a general on the lot?
Is the general across the whole range of long-term empty properties.
So out of those 48 properties, do we know how many of them are we receiving collection from?
I haven't checked all 48, but as I mentioned earlier, when I looked, when I brought the report to council, when to present to yourself on the decision of whether to increase, based upon longevity, how long the properties remain empty, that majority of the 20 that I actually examined were paying, and they were paying by actual direct debit. To pick up on what Sean was saying earlier, council tax is, and as far as empty properties, it is very transient. The first 6 months for an empty property is no charge. 6 to 12 months is 100%. Thereafter, in our terms, is classed as a long-term empty property. So it depends on the time, the line in the sand, so to speak, of when you actually do that measure of how many properties may be within which category at that particular point in time. For me, on the revenue side of it, the introduction of the long-term empty properties, the success of charging the higher rate, as we've already been mentioned, and seeing a reduction as we go forwards for those 10 plus and 5 to 10, to me would be a success, because it's not something that, you know, I want to do, is to charge that that level, you know, on the council tax, because obviously it's very difficult for me to be able to collect upon. But to see engagement and movement and reductions in those with those length of times, hopefully reporting back to yourselves in future reports, I think that would be success.
Yeah, obviously there's going to be a lot of movement at the front end. I understand that, with people buying, selling houses, you know, houses coming into estates that got to be settled. Every community and every councillor's got houses in their area that they know are blight ones. And I know you've said, obviously you've done this survey outside the houses, and some of them don't look derelict, but we all know the ones that do. Is there any emphasis going to be put on the ones that we know are causing a blight?
Well, we do respond to complaints now and act as we can within the legislation, but obviously there's, I think it was 6 or 7 that were high risk, and yeah, we'll be taking a report to Cabinet with a view to targeting those.
Yeah, one of my questions, are there any properties that we don't know who the owners are? Or
There will be some, because some are sort of interstate or, you know, no wills, but I can't give you a figure on that. But I'm guessing there will be.
if there's no wills, wouldn't they become on the bona vacante list eventually?
Potentially, yes.
There will be people under, you know, we going off homes, but we've got properties where they're just not contactable, so there will be those as well. I would imagine.
Understand why they're not contactable, where that, you know.
Yeah, well, I did. Yeah, they just don't reply, and it's maybe the enforcement powers need to come in then. So Paul, did he want to come in as well?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Mr. Chapman makes a very good point in terms of the moving feast each year and the new ones coming on. And I think that's the important point in terms of the strategy, is not to overly concentrate on the long term, because sometimes we can make some good gains with the new properties coming on the market, where it's probably easier to match those with new landlords, RSLs, and use the other opportunities. You know, a key work for the group is, as properties become empty, is making sure we can match those difficult properties that don't just go to market by right, and put them in touch with the relevant people. And sometimes doing that at the earlier stage, you can get the property moved quicker than the longer term ones, which are more problematic. So, you know, those new properties coming on in a year will be key for us in the group to quickly try and come up with solutions to get those off being empty properties.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else got any questions? No. I've got a couple. Did you want to come in? You sure? Okay. I got a couple. So the report last year, March 24, gave us a valuable breakdown of vacancy duration before reoccupation. Going forward, will we be routinely tracking and reporting on how long-term properties were empty before reoccupation? Because I think that's what we're really keen, how long these properties are empty before they're brought back in. You know, that data seems vital for assessing the effectiveness of the tools we're using. That makes sense.
Yes, I think we would be reliant through the steering group and through Mark's team on understanding which ones are empty. That's the data that they're happily sharing with us at the moment. And I suppose Mark's team would also know when they come back into use. I think that's what you're getting at, is it?
Yeah.
I suppose we are trying to tackle the most difficult ones, contrary to what Paul has just said. You know, it's trying to get the quick wins as quickly as we can, but those problematic ones we'll need to target as well. So, but I think we can get a list for you.
Yeah, that would be good. You know, it does seem that they targeted the 1 to 2 and the under 5s. You know, maybe they're more responsive to get back to you. I'm guessing from like having bought a property during COVID or just before COVID, that had an impact on not being able to do any work on a property, materials going up as well. So, hopefully, those, that's leveling out now, and then it's a more of a truer picture, I guess.
We'll also be looking at those. We hope to take a cabinet report to get a steer to look at those two that have been empty from 2 years up till 10 years as well, and surveying those in the same way as we've done the over 10s.
Yeah, because I think from us as councillors, the ones we really want to focus on are the 5 to 10 and the 10 plus. Obviously it's important, the short term ones, but they might be doing work, and I bought a house. It took me 3.5 years to do it out, so it does take time. But it's the ones that have been long term. And when I say long term, I mean 5, 10, 15 years. Sarah, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just to say that obviously the strategy's been in place since 22. There was an agreed action plan and a risk assessment as part of that strategy. But obviously we haven't, I don't think, up until now had, other than the sort of annual data set, much coming forward to members. So obviously we've worked with the teams across the departments, because it doesn't matter where teams are, we can still work together, collaboratively. And I've worked with the cabinet member to bring not only the information that you've requested on the long-term empties, which is important, but also to bring you back an update on the whole of the strategy, to be sort of open and transparent with members in terms of the progress against the whole of that strategy, not just the long-term empties. You'll know, empty homes is a complex and, quite slow-moving process, but the team have done quite a lot, in those sort of 3 years to progress as much as they possibly can. And the report, I think, demonstrates that. But we're also learning from others, and we are linked into networks, both at regional and national levels, to be able to raise those questions that many of you have raised today. We've also agreed as part of the action plan, again, to bring members more regular updates back and information, again, to sort of, be as open as we can in terms of the data, but also the activity that we're doing, because as we've seen, the data can sometimes change quite slowly. And then we've also undertaken to do an annual progress report on the remaining 2 years of the strategy as well.
Thanks, Sarah. Mark, do you want to come in, see your finger on the button?
Yeah, it was just on the question you just raised, Chair, is regarding the measure and the metrics on there. On the council tax, point of view, looking at the success of bringing properties back into use is not something that we would tend to look at. It would just, as I said, obviously the responsibility it is in tax collection. The measures that obviously within this report are that of environmental health and for those people they've engaged with. So I think we can offer and feed any information that would be available from revenue to environmental health to assist them in reporting back to yourself. But it's not something the revenues would actually look at each property that was empty at a said date and another date and see, did it come back into use as a direct interaction, from the authority, or did the customer do it themselves? So that is probably, the question. So I think, Sian, correct me if I'm wrong, but what's actually been reported are those that we've had direct interaction with and we've assisted in bringing the properties back into use. So it'd be kind of, you're talking several hundred properties to examine in different periods of time, and it would be very unwieldy to check every single one of them and, on our side of it and see exactly what occurred in bringing, when it was empty to actually bringing brought back into use.
Okay, thank you. I was just going to, I suppose this will come under the strategy or the working group. Is there an appetite for a bespoke action plan or pilot focused just solely on the 5, 10 plus years cohort? Maybe a task force solely on homes in those brackets, our most persistent and complex homes. Yeah.
Thanks. So, not specifically the 5 to 10, Chair, but obviously the promise in this action plan is that before the end of the strategy, we'll have a risk assessment for all properties that fall within the 2 and 10 years. And I think that will help us then, because as we've seen from the results so far in the 10 years, what we need to be looking at is the actual risk they pose under the empty home strategy and the risk assessment. So whether they impact on the amenity of the area, whether they're dilapidated, whether there's risk of fly tipping, pest infestation, So I think having those in place, as we already have with the 10 years, will help us be able to look at those properties and take action based on the actual risk they pose, rather than simply the fact that they may be 9 years empty, for example.
Thank you. I'm not sure who's next. Do you want to fight? Councillor Jones.
Out of the chamber.
Will we ever have a situation where we'll have no empty properties over 10 years in Merthyr Tydfil?
What do you think, right?
Probably not, because people have the choice to keep them empty, and if they're not causing a problem, they're paying their council tax premium. There is no legislation to force somebody to use a property.
No. But if a property's been vacant for, I don't know, 10, 15, just give an example, somebody, I think you said it was 30 years. God almighty, I'd like to observe myself for that property from end to end, and if it's in a magnificent condition, these must be spending money for no purpose whatsoever, which really surprises me. Can we go back to the figures? Because the figures that Mark gave us, the additional information we want, it's very interesting. Because as of the 1st of April this year, we got a total of 928 properties, well, not used. And I think, I'm sure other members are aware, but I've had these figures previously kindly supplied by Mark. But I'm right in saying, Mark, that you can take out a few hundred of those at any one time, because they all come under different aspects where, in effect, we can't do virtually much about them. People who go into homes. So my understanding is they pay the council tax and that, but they're in a home. And probably a lot of them are not going to come back there. But there's other areas where they don't come under this particular category that we're talking about. That's right. There's always going to be, well, I would say a few hundred of these, 300 or 400 in that region that won't come under this.
You're correct that there are a number of exempt classifications. The Class A's and the Class C's. The Class A's are property required and undergoing renovation. As you see, that has dropped, to the current figure to about 69. Forgive me, I haven't got the computer in front of me at the moment.
Yeah.
So that's dropped a little bit, from what I reported, previously. But it's a ticking clock. As we mentioned earlier, it's a very transient situation. That they get 12 months on there, and if they haven't finished the work within 12 months, there are a couple of exceptions which we will extend up to 18 months if you're still working on the property, so they don't get charged a premium. But in effect, then, if they haven't finished the work, we can start charging them. It's the same for those within the Class C. Class C exemptions are for properties that are empty and unfurnished. Generally, as was mentioned earlier, for property up for sale or tenant or whichever, they would move in, they would move out. So there's an allowance then for the landlord to re-tenant the property without any financial penalty to themselves. So they got 6 months. From month 6 to month 12, which I mentioned earlier, that there's 100% charge, because obviously, as far as council tax legislation is concerned, that it's not classed as long-term empty as far as premiums until it's been empty for a year. So you're always going to see, several hundred properties within the Class C range. As I mentioned earlier, it's a line in the sand. Today I'm reported it was 355. It could be 350, it could be 360, whichever. It moves up and down on there. What is kind of static on there when you actually look at this is those 5 to 10, 10, 20. So that's where the focal point was as regards to the empty property premium. You are correct. There are a number of classifications which aren't included within these. Those would be if when someone's passed away, probate hasn't been granted, and the other, as you rightly mentioned, which is the Class C exemption for those that are in residential care. It isn't to the figure that you surmise. There are a number. I would say there's probably less than 100 properties in total between the F and E. There is another classification, which is for those that are receiving care or providing care. So if I was unwell and come to live with yourself, Councillor Jones, and left my property empty because that they've either come to look after you or vice versa, there'd be no charge of my property because of that, which is reasonable. People in detained, that it could be that their property would be empty. So all in total, I'd probably say no more than 200 additional properties of what's actually reported here. So generally, you're looking around about 1,200 properties at any one time that potentially could be empty.
Right. But unless my mathematics have gone astray, I got here that there are 489 vacant properties, empty properties throughout the county borough from 6 months or more right up. That is our concern at the moment. Am I right or wrong?
Councillor Williams-Price wants to come in quickly.
Thanks. So, Councillor Jones, I appreciate your point is that these figures throughout the year move, they're very variable, and that's why it's important that under the empty home strategy we have that fixed point, which is the 1st of April each year, and the number of empty homes is calculated in line with the definition as sent out of Appendix 3 in the report. So in terms of the 1st of April 2025, I don't believe we have that figured as yet. I think that's being calculated as part of the end of year work that the team is doing.
So amongst those, we're looking at the years that have been empty, but as the point has been made by David, those that are real, we've got them all. Every ward has got them. Where there's problems, circumstances that cases I've dealt with, I wouldn't want to be living next to one of these ever, because the problems, from my experience, seem to have gone on for years, and these residents have had to put up with them. So are we now concentrating, from everything that's been said, on the requirement to deal with the ones that are blighted and causing problems, and you've got evidence on record of complaints? Are these the ones that you're looking at, whether they are 2 years old or over 10 years old?
Thanks. So at the moment, as in the report, we've got the information for properties over 10 years. We'll be able to review those as a cabinet with the report coming in June on what action we can take. And then there's a further commitment before 26-27, so the end of this strategy, we will have those risk assessments in place for everything between 2 and 10 years. And then we can take further decisions based on the outcomes of those risk assessments.
And how many of those, because you've talked about, I've forgotten the figure, how many were surveyed? Was it 51? 51, those are the 51. You obviously wouldn't know the condition of a lot of others, because somebody just takes a photograph outside. It doesn't tell you anything. The inside of the properties might be in a dreadful state. So how do you come to the conclusion, apart from complaints, how you deal with particular properties?
There's no one size fits all. There's a range of ways to address the issues depending what they are. In the short term, responding to complaints, it could be building control, it could be planning, or a range of public health legislation if it's affecting other people. So yeah, we would only know about those if it's impacting somebody else. So that would be visible from the outside, or it would be affecting a neighbour. Of course, the risk assessment does take into account complaints, you know, sort of the type of complaints, the number of complaints, the level of nuisance perceived, and how well the property is maintained. I accept it's an external visual indication. It's not as detailed, but you know, when we get to the highest risk ones, then we'll need to probably do more intrusive surveys on those.
Sorry, Councillor Williams-Price, you say there's an updated report going to Cabinet, is that right?
There'll be a report coming to Cabinet in June, which will outline recommendations for action on the 6 high-risk over 10 years properties that are identified in Appendix 2.
Right. Okay. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone. Councillor Thomas?
Chair, mine was ready for comments, I thought the questions had ended. So.
Okay. Any more questions? Nobody's indicating. Move on to comments. Councillor Thomas?
Thank you, Chair. You know, reading the report, I think overall is quite positive. When you think about the numbers that's going to be constant, the officer just described, you know, the amount of homes that's going to be empty for various reasons. So there's always going to be a core amount that's going to fill that table. But you know, if we just look at the figures, the decrease in numbers over the last 10 years. It works out about 20%. And if we can keep, you know, knocking those kind of numbers down and bringing that empty homes down, I think that's only good for Merthyr Tydfil.
Thanks, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Jones?
I found this to be a frustrating subject. I mean, officers must be even more frustrated dealing with these and utilising on a number of occasions particular legislation. I think we are beginning to get to grips with this now, but there's more and more work to be done. We're gathering more data, perhaps, than we were previously, and that needs to continue. But what I'd like to see, if it's at all possible, is the pace of things. With something like this, you've got to keep on top of it to avoid problems that we've had in the past where, you know, I could write a book on a few properties in my ward, and in some cases it's gone on for years and years. So we need to deal with those that are causing all sorts of problems to close neighbours and the community in general. But I look forward, Chair, to further reports. Can I make perhaps one plea that when we break down the number of empty properties, is it possible, I hope so, that we can break down where they are in each of the 11 wards in the county borough? So we got a real problem of exactly where they all are. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Jones. I'd be interested to know that as well. Anybody? I'm quite lucky. I got RSL owning most of my ward, I think. Any other comments? No. Okay. Mark, did you want to come in?
Just to clarify what the question that Councillor asked there, then yes, that is feasible. And in the various classifications, as the Chair mentioned there, that some, certainly in the short-term empty properties, might be higher in some wards, because obviously for where they are. I obviously don't want to name them right to you now. If I may, the focal point, you know, looking at what some of the questions you've been looking at, and maybe what we've been focused on is 10 years plus. In some of the engagements, you know, as I mentioned, there was 2 properties earlier. The one property which we've suddenly engaged with has only been empty for 8. So it wouldn't necessarily be looked at upon the long-term empty and maybe targeted, by environmental health. But, engagement has started. Now, the measures that have been reported within the report are environmental health only. So should it be expanded upon, looking at the engagements the revenue has had and where we've signposted Mr. Jones, Mr. Price, whichever, should that actually feed within to this measure, because it could be significantly higher. The actual engagement with the council taxpayer and the net result may be significantly higher than what we're actually reporting to you, because these are, as I said, in just environmental health figures, they're not revenue figures. So, so should we be looking at it, the two that I've mentioned here now this morning, or this afternoon, beg your pardon, should they be added, to the measure? Because we've engaged them, officers have visited the premises, offered advice, regarding HRA in the one particular instance have been empty for over 30 years. So that, so that is, something. There is also one other aspect that's been mentioned about problematic properties within certain areas. I think Geraint mentioned one previously. It was referred to as Jumanji. I think it was, in Brecon Road. There are a number of properties that, in taxation, can be problematic. Certainly on my side, if they don't pay, and regardless of what but there are others then that aren't in rating, and regardless of what comments have been made, there is absolutely nothing that I can do on our side of it. So whatever we do as far as charging, increasing it, to the level we currently have, it potentially becomes an environmental issue if the property is seen as causing a blight to the area. So I suppose the question asking yourself then, when would you like this information? As far as the the breakdown, the analysis on there. Do you want it for the June? The report's comes in June.
How long will it take you to do? Sorry, how long will it take you to sort it all out? Because the way you're talking there, perhaps you want to review on them on not years and break it down instead of a 10-year problem and long-term problem. Can we bring that 10 years down to 8? Because the way you're talking is a bit longer, it make it shorter and get on with it.
I don't think age, age is relevant, as far as, with the charging structure. As far as engagement is concerned, it's down to the individual. Because as I mentioned, earlier, I've got someone all of a sudden that wants to talk to us after 30 years. I've got somebody who wants to talk to us after 8. There may be someone that wants to talk to us after a year. So, the measures, that I'd be surprised when Melissa, she obviously can't speak for her because she's not in the chamber. But when she actually reports back on these individual properties and look at the longevity for those that have actually come back into use, I think that the range of age will be varied. It wouldn't all be long term, but it proves on the long term because the figures haven't really moved a great deal. So it'll be interesting, I'd say there'd be more short to medium term that those have been brought back into use, which comes to what Paul's comments were earlier. The quicker we engage with these people, the more likely we're going to get them back into use, and available for people.
The public don't see the short range. You only see the older ones, long term. And you take Brecon Road, for example, go down Brecon Road, there's about 3 there. And claim we carry with 3 judges. They pick them up straight away. One next door to that property could be empty, and they wouldn't know when they curlings up everything. So that's the problem. Can we review it?
Not for me, no.
No, but can we review?
Councillor Williams-Price wants to come in.
Thanks. I made several notes through the course of this committee, and I think one area that we need to look at is making sure we're providing the right information to members, obviously particularly the Scrutiny Committee. So if it's okay, following on from this meeting, I'll have that discussion with Sarah as Director of Governance and Resources and also Craig Flynn as Director of Finance to see what information will be helpful in getting that scope of where the properties currently are across the time frames they've been empty.
Okay. You could ask another question in comments, Clive. Go on.
I'm commenting on a comment now. By the sound of it, Mark, for example, can provide us immediately with a breakdown of where these these properties are per ward. I presume that's correct. That could be sent out to members within the next few days.
Sarah, do you want to come in? Well, weeks I was thinking, Clive.
Yeah, I mean, it would be useful for us if we could, Councillor Jones, to go back to the steering group, because we wanted to, at the next steering group, just feedback your comments and the feedback that we've had, so that we've, the strategy covers, a couple of points. The strategy covers all empty properties, whether they've been empty, so from 6 months up to 30 years. There's no limit. But as Councillor Williams-Price said earlier, we've committed to, and this is in line with what other local authorities are doing, that's starting from 2 years to 10 years. So that's what we said that we would utilise, and we would do a risk assessment on all of them now in the next 2 years. Because actually what is found with empty properties, that usually those underneath that time come back into use a lot quicker and a lot easier. So that's, in other local authorities, they are starting at the 2-year point. So that's what we've suggested in there. We'll take that forward as part of the Cabinet report, alongside those, what are we going to do about the ones that we've already identified through the risk assessment are really, really problematic for us in that 10-year category. So if it's okay, Councillor Jones, if we can go back to the next meeting we've got is early May, if we can go back to the steering group and agree amongst ourselves which data and our sort of the Director of Finance, which data, because we've said that we provide more data for members on a more regular basis, and if we can agree that data set, and maybe provide that, then after that, if that's okay. But it would be good for us to take that back to the whole group. Because obviously we've got different sets of data across the organisation, if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Great. Any more comments, questions? All right. I just like to thank everybody for coming, especially Melissa for being unwell and still attending. That was great. Thank you very much. It does seem like we're all moving in the right direction, and I think you're going to provide us with the right data sets that we require to really dig into this. Keep up a good work, and thank you for attending today. You're welcome to stay, or you're welcome to go. Okay. Item agenda 4, Scrutiny Forward Work Programme 2024-25. This is the last meeting of the cycle. We held a quarterly meeting last week, briefly discussed the new cycle. The events policy will probably be the first policy that will come to the new cycle. We are going to set a date, and we're going to contact you all with a forward work program planning meeting in the coming weeks. So if you can start having to think about topics, that would be really good. Does anybody want to discuss that? Councillor Jones?
Thank you, folks.
Cheers. The Cyfarthfa Castle Regeneration, it says postponed here on the fall work programme. So where are we with that, for example? And if we're looking at that at any time in the future, does that mean that we are asking representatives, as well as officers of the council, representatives of the Cyfarthfa Foundation to come in?
Yeah, well, that's where I took it to be. Well, obviously Jess hasn't been in post. Well, she's probably been here
About a
6
week,
months.
yeah.
Can I get back? We'll have a quick look.
Yeah.
And then get back to you.
Yeah, that's fine.
They came in December.
Yeah, foundation didn't attend.
Yeah, December. That would be something we can discuss on the forward work program.
Right.
We discussed it in December, but obviously she didn't come in then. So,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Okay.
Anything else? No. David.
One of the ones that was possibly targeted, oversight. Is there any update on that, or?
I haven't had any, but we can ask for an update, and can bring it in. We can discuss it as part of the forward work program to come in early as well. Okay. I got nothing else on forward work program. Item agenda 5, scrutiny referrals. I have none. Item agenda 6, feedback on scrutiny activities and outstanding actions. We'll send a log following this meeting with all the updates. Struggling to get a few sorted on a couple of topics, lack of responses, but we'll push those forward. Item agenda 7, feedback report, flight tipping, task and finish workshop. Sarah, do you want to? No. Oh, he's just coming to watch us also. Yeah, the workshop was held last week. Some of us attended. Do you want to say anything? Yeah.
So, yeah, just very, very briefly then, Chair. From the task and finish group, obviously that was come out of scrutiny. We set up an officer working group, and we've been having fortnightly meetings to discuss a number of areas. We've been getting different stakeholders in, so we've met with RSLs, we've met with Keep Wales Tidy, we've met with Flight Tip and Action Wales. We've met with 2 other local authorities who are doing quite good work in this area. So we've met with Blaen y Gwent, we've met with Neath Talbot, we've met with the police. So we've had a number of different stakeholders in. We've also had the data team in internally to look at how we capture the data, etc. And we've had our corporate comms team in to see what more we can do around that. So just do you want me to cover off some of the areas, or is that okay?
No, that's fine. I think, yeah. Anybody got any feedback? Somebody was attended the workshop last week. Councillor George?
It's just the one question I keep asking constantly. I'm sure if you've discussed it. The issue about fly tipping and littering of private land and us being able to get access and take the owners to task. Have they cracked this in other authorities, Sarah?
I mean, whilst there is not the statutory duty for the local authority to do that, yes. So in other local authorities, they are taking some engagement action with when they've had fly tipping on private land.
Right.
So what we are doing, just to wrap this up, is that we will be we're formulating at the moment. Again, we've got the cross-party working group is across the whole of the organisation. We are formulating a draft policy to come back to members for approval, which will include not only the definitions of fly tipping and sort of waste enforcement, but also the enforcement tools that we've got. Right. And we've identified some new ones, good, actually, that others are using that have been quite successful. And that there will be a sort of a small comms and engagement plan to go alongside that as well.
Oh, it's lovely. It seems a bit of good news.
Yeah, I agree. There's a building, and me and Clive are quite passionate about getting sorted. I've mentioned it to you before. If we can, focus on buildings like that, that would be really good. Anybody else want to come in? No? Okay, moving on. Agenda item 8. Any other business deemed urgent by the chair? I have none. Hope you have a lovely evening. I'd like to bring a meeting to a close.